Hi guys, today I'm bringing you another ranking video and we are going to be ranking my last 16 palettes, and I'm patting myself on the back here because I didn't wait like 4 months in between this time, so we're doing good. I like keeping these to like shorter than, 20 if I can, ideally 10, but it usually just ends up being more because I kind of just lose track. Like every time I'm done reviewing a palette, I'll just kind of put it away and then I realize, oh wait, how long has it been since I did a ranking video? And then I'll count the palette and be like, oh, it's time. So we're gonna be ranking the last 16 palettes that I have tried. Actually, a lot of these palettes are palettes that I haven't done dedicated videos on, and I have mentioned some of these in my travel makeup diary series that I've brought, that I reviewed, and I'm also going to be mentioning some of these. The video might be up already in my makeup diaries, the latest one. Not sure if I've posted that one before this one goes up, but just know that I'll be showing you some looks with some of these palettes. But I'm gonna give you my thoughts on all of these, and that's pretty much going to be it. So I think we should just go ahead and jump into the ranking. We're going to start on the bottom, and this is a palette that I definitely have not done a dedicated video with. I got this in the mail not that long ago, I want to say about a week ago, and this is from Alter Ego. So this is their newest palette. It's called the Sakura palette, and this is a dupe for one of the Natasha Denona palettes that I don't have. I'll put a picture up on the screen so you can see what it looks like compared to this one, but I feel like the color stories are similar but not exactly the same. So I wouldn't say that this is a dupe, even though I don't... Wait, do I have the other palette? I don't think I have the other palette. I could be wrong. I don't think I do. But anyway, my thoughts on this palette is that I feel like it's not my favorite. The mattes are not very pigmented and the shimmers are okay. I like this shimmer. The shimmer is pretty. The others are very, very basic, and this palette doesn't go very dark at all. Like, it looks like it would. This is probably the darkest you're gonna get the matte, and even this shade on the eye shows up way lighter than it does in the pan. This, I think, is supposed to be a cream to matte, but when I tried to use it, it showed up definitely more like a satin, and it certainly was not as pigmented as it was in the pan. So color story wise, formula wise, just not my favorite. It's going to end up on the bottom. If you're interested in any of these palettes, I will link them all down below, as well as if I have any codes, I will have that on the screen when I'm talking about the brands, as well as in my description box. And I will also mark which ones have been sent as PR if you're curious about all of that. It'll be down below. So let's just go ahead and move on. So the next palette here is a palette that I've gotten quite a few packages from Colourpop lately, PR packages, and I feel like the collections haven't really been anything that I wanted to do a dedicated video on, except for one of these palettes, which I simply didn't have time because I was gone when they sent it to me, and when I got back, it was just, I felt like a little bit too late because with Colourpop, you guys know how much they release. So I just felt like doing a dedicated video on that palette, that collection, I didn't feel like it would do very well, and I felt like people were kind of just over it by then. But this is one of the palettes that they sent me in another collection, and this is called the Daydreaming palette. So they sent me, I want to say 4 of these little mini palettes. This is the only one that I've tried, the only one that I felt like I even had any interest in trying. The other ones were very, very just neutral, kind of boring, wasn't really my thing. Like, sorry Colourpop, but I also want to make sure that the stuff that I'm reviewing is, makeup that I'm excited about as well, and I don't want to just try things to try things. And I also know that you guys as my audience, I know what you're into, and I just didn't feel like the other palettes were something that you guys really wanted to see. So I did do a look with this one, and I liked it okay. It's fine. It's nothing special. I feel like if this had been done by a different brand that I like more, with a formula that I like more, especially in the shimmers, I think I would like this a little bit more. How many times can I say more in one sentence? I feel like the color story is okay, but Colourpop doesn't have my favorite shimmers. I find them to be quite lackluster and sort of boring. That's just my humble opinion, so maybe not so humble, but that's just my opinion. And I know a lot of people love Colourpop shimmers, and I think some of them, the ones they have, are nice, but a lot of them are just kind of meh. So that's just kind of how I feel about this palette. It's kind of meh. Next palette, I'm surprised I have in here, but I had it in my bunch of palettes to rank, and I feel like I ranked it in my ranking every palette I've tried this year so far, which went up, I don't know, like a month ago maybe. And I feel like I had this in here, but maybe I didn't. So I'm gonna rank it here again. But this is from Martina Cosmetics, and this is the Diner palette. So I haven't done a dedicated video with any of the palettes from Martina because I bought both of these fairly late. I was curious about the brand, and I made an order, and I was like, let me kind of just test it out. I did show them in one of my makeup diaries, which it's been a while ago, but here's what this palette looks like. And I will say the mattes in this are wonderful. The color story is really nice, but the shimmers are very lackluster. They're almost just like a very muted satin shade. They're barely a shimmer at all, and I need more. And I do have to, if there is a palette that has both mattes and shimmers in it, I have to rank it as a standalone palette. It's one thing if it's just a matte palette or if it's just a shimmer palette, then I can kind of be like, okay, well, if I pair it with this, here's how I like it. But since this is supposed to be a standalone palette, given that it does have mattes and shimmers, I just feel like I would never reach for this palette as a standalone palette, even though I really like some of the tones in here. I can definitely see myself using the mattes in this, but for the shimmers, we'll never reach for these. I find them to be just very, very below average, I guess you can say. The next palette is also a palette from Martini Cosmetics, and this is for the exact same reason, so I'm not going to blabber on too much about it, but this is called the Moolah palette, I think. And I love the color story of this. This is beautiful. This is a really pretty grungy, kind of neutrally green palette. And I think that if this was made by a different brand who has a shimmer formula that I like more, I would be all over this palette. I would be like, this is the best palette I've tried this year. I love the color story. I love everything about it. But given that I don't really love the shimmers in here, I will say these shimmers are a little bit better than the ones in the Diner palette, but still not as good as what I would like for them to be. Some of these are okay. I haven't tried all of them. I've done, I think, 2 looks with this palette, and I just felt kind of, okay, I like it, but I don't love it about it. So that's just kind of why I had to rank it where I did. The next palette here is the one from Colourpop that I said I almost did a dedicated video on, and this is the Naruto palette. I think that this palette actually is a really nice color story, and I've only done 1 look with this, so take this review with a grain of salt because I haven't tried that many shades. And I think I used this together with something else. It's been like maybe 2 weeks or so since I used this in a look that I didn't film, but I am going to put into my makeup diaries anyway. You've probably seen that already. Maybe this is going up first. I don't know, but I had an okay time with this palette. That's pretty much why it ended up here. I think the color story is nice. Like, is this something we've seen from Colourpop probably 50 times by now? Yeah, it's kind of, there's a lot of neutrals with a couple pops of color, and there's, a gold shimmer, a silver shimmer, a blue shimmer. We've seen this, but I still think it's a nice color story, and I think that I could definitely do a lot of looks that I would enjoy with this palette, but given that it's not my perfect formulas and it does have a pressed glitter in here, which is the blue, which I don't really like pressed glitters, and even though I think the Colourpop nude glitter formula is okay, I still would rather it be a regular shimmer than a glitter, so couldn't really rank it any higher, but I do think this is a nice palette from Colourpop. Next up, we're getting into the palettes that I would probably recommend. I would say the other ones are more like a preference thing. If you think you would like them despite me not liking them, I would say go ahead and get them still. It just depends on what you are looking for in your eyeshadows, and a lot of people love those very subtle shimmers, which is just not really my thing. This is another palette that I have not done a dedicated video on, and I don't know if I've mentioned this in my makeup diaries because I had probably like 10 to 15 clips or so that just ended up being kind of old, that I'm like, I'm just gonna start fresh. I felt like I was just way behind on the makeup diaries because I did go traveling. I had a couple trips and I filmed on those too, and I wanted to get those up first, and then I felt like they were just more relevant than the ones that I already filmed, and so here we are. But this is the Coven palette from Spellbound Beauty. They did kindly send this to me in PR, and I think that this is a really, really pretty palette. The reason why it ended up a little bit lower is because the matte formula isn't my favorite, and also the matte selection isn't my favorite. I feel like these 2 purple mattes are very similar, these 2 blue mattes are very similar, and there's only so much you can do with the 6 mattes that you do have. There is a really nice black matte in here. I will show you some of the looks that I have done with this palette so far, so you can see I thoroughly enjoy the palette, the looks that I've done. I think they turned out really, really nice. But I also did have some issues with creasing with these shimmers, and I also had a little bit of creasing with the shimmers in their previous palette, not as much as this one. So yeah, I don't really know, like, those are the reasons I would say that I don't love this palette. I do think that they have so much potential as a brand though, and I can't wait to keep seeing what they do in the future. But I feel like they need to work on their matte color stories a little bit more, because in both of the palettes, they've had sort of like a couple of shades that have just been too similar to warrant being in a palette with only a few mattes in them. You know, like if you're gonna have only 6 mattes, make sure that the mattes are all different, or at least that if they're in the same color family, that they're different enough in saturation and in tone that you can like blend them into each other and still have them look like 2 different colors, because that you can't really do with this palette with some of these. So those are sort of my thoughts. Again, I think it's a nice palette, but there are things that I wish were a little bit different. Next up is a palette that I've had a lot of fun with this. I brought this on one of my trips. I've shown a couple of looks in those videos, and this is the Fairy Tale Fairies palette from Simply Posh. This isn't a new palette, but I think they reformulated it or they restocked it and they sent it to me. And if I didn't have some issues with the pressing of the shimmers in this palette, which they have come out and said that they have had some issues with their past palettes and them getting hard pan and just being too hard pressed, which I feel like is the case with this palette. I have problems with this shade, this shade, this shade, this shade. This one I haven't used. This one I'm not sure I've used, but basically every shade that I've used in this palette have been very, very hard pressed, and it just makes it hard to use, and it's not as good as some of the other palettes I have from Simply Posh. So there's obviously something that's kind of gone wrong with the pressing of this, because I know how the Simply Posh palettes are supposed to be pressed, you know, and I feel like this isn't it, but the mattes are so beautiful. Like, they have an amazing matte formula, and I think that if you're interested in this palette still, I think you would like it. But just be aware that the shimmers are very hard pressed, or if you are interested in this, maybe just hold out for a little bit, because I know they're working on the issue, and they even said that they had a launch that has gotten postponed, I think, because they were trying to make sure that everything was okay with the pressing and stuff like that. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. I think the color story is beautiful. I had a good time with this. Just wish that some of the shimmers were a little bit looser pressed. Next up is a Sugar Drizzle palette, and this is the Mojito palette. The only reason this didn't end up higher is just because it's very monochromatic, and even though I love the formulas in here, like this is so beautiful, like this multi-chrome here as well, so intense. Like you can even see it shift from like bright orange to green. It's such a cool palette. This shade in the middle here, absolutely stunning. It's such a pretty like yellow to green to blue to pink. It's a very unique shade, and I've had a really good time with this. I've done 2 looks with this so far, and I really like it. So if you're interested, you like blue, you're definitely going to like this. Now, one of the palettes that I have on my eyes today is the one that I'm ranking next, and I wanted to try this just one more time just before I sort of made up my mind about it. And this is one that I've just done a video with, and it's the Blend Bunny Forget Me Not palette. So this is an eye and cheek palette, and I just wanted to test out a couple more of these shades, especially on my eyes, because I feel like for me, this is definitely going to be more of an eyeshadow palette than a face palette, because I'm very simple when it comes to my face makeup. I really only do bronzer, blush, highlighter. I don't really do any contour or anything like that, and I don't like to spend that much time on my base because I'm lazy. I want to move on to the fun stuff, which for me is like all the color cosmetics. So I did use this for the top portion of my lid. I used a black shade. I used, I think, all of these 5 kind of shades just randomly on my eyes, just try and like put them on there. And I used the silver shade here in the middle of my lid. Underneath my eye, I just have some eyeliner and a Cliona shadow. And I really do like this palette, but I feel like, okay, so here are my thoughts. I think that it's a very beautiful, beautiful neutral palette if you're someone who likes neutral makeup. But I also think that if I'm gonna reach for this for an eyeshadow palette, it's very large. I feel like I have other smaller neutral palettes that I would probably reach for over this, but time will tell. I think the formulas in here are beautiful. The highlighters are beautiful as well on the face. I don't like them as much on the eyes. I feel like they don't give me that oomph that I'm really looking for, which is fair because they are mostly, you know, made to be highlighters, but you can also use them on the eyes if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't know. I've yet to kind of make up my mind on how much I really think I'm going to be using this palette. Like, I don't know for sure. Again, time will tell. We'll see how much I end up using this, but I think the formulas are beautiful. I think the quality is really nice, and I think that if you like the look of this palette and it's something that you will use a lot, I think you will use it a lot. So that's why it ended up here. Let's move on. So the next couple of palettes here are palettes that I really, really like. The next palette I just did a dedicated video with as well, because this was one that I'd done a lot of looks with, but I never got around to like finishing the video. And this is the Cosmos palette from ABH. And I said in that video that I feel like this is actually a very nicely curated neutral palette with some really beautiful shimmers. There are a couple of shades in here that I'm not the biggest fan of, especially this shade. This shade is sort of a satin with like a bunch of glitter particles suspended into it, and when you put it on the eyes, the glitter particles kind of like go everywhere and they don't stick evenly, and it just looks like you have sparse spots of glitter in one spot and then like no spots of glitter, and it's a weird shade. But I really like this shimmer, this shimmer, this shimmer, this shimmer, this shimmer. They're beautiful. Even this one, which is sort of a very dark blue black with glitters in it, but it's not a shimmer, it's a matte with glitters in it. And if you layer this sort of like over this blue shade, you can still see the sparkles in it. And it's really, really beautiful, and I actually really like it. And I think the mattes are wonderful. I love the selection of them. I think they did a really good job, like making sure that even though there are 5 just very neutral shades in this palette, they're different enough that they weren't being in here. So I really like this palette. I think it's a well done palette, and I don't really have any complaints about it. The next palette is also a pretty neutral palette. This is the Fighter palette from Fantasy Cosmetica, and I really, really like this palette. I think the only reason why it didn't end up higher is because it is a pretty small palette, and it also is a pretty neutral palette. I mean, look, I still love color. I'm never gonna be that person who's just like all about neutrals. I like neutrals mixed with color, and I don't really feel like I get my color fix with this palette, but that is okay. Like, this is a beautiful companion palette. I can see myself using this along with other shades, and this shade, you guys know how much of a sucker I am for a shade like this, which is one of those like iridescent blue shades with like a little shift to it. Oh, so pretty. They just look so wet looking on the eyes, and they're beautiful. So yeah, I really like this palette. I have no complaints. I think the mattes perform really well. The shimmers are beautiful, and it's a fun, different, curated, you know, small neutral palette. So I really like it. Next is a palette that I feel like maybe if I had had more time to play with this when I first got it, I would have maybe ranked it higher. I just haven't had enough time to play with this, and it makes me a little sad, but this is a Rick and Morty palette from Glamlight. I think that this is a really fun palette. Like, I really enjoy this color story, and I really need to just do another look with this. I feel like I could do so many fun things with this palette, and I remember really liking it when I did do a look with this. I did a video and I only did one look, but I think I used like 8 shades or something like that, and it's a really fun palette. Like, I've always liked Glamlight's formula. I don't really have any complaints. I think the mattes are always really nice and pigmented, easy to work with, and the shimmers are very sparkly and pretty. So yeah, I don't know. If I had more time, maybe this would have ended up in a different spot, but this is just kind of where I felt like it had to end up with how I feel about it at this very moment. So yeah, again, take this with a grain of salt because I haven't used it enough. Next up is a palette that really, really surprised me, and this is the, man, I don't even know the name of this, but this is the newest palette from Lethal Cosmetics. Is this a Wildflower palette or something like that? Wild, I really don't know. It doesn't have the name on it. Mine did come a little bit shattered. Some of these shimmers, if you can see, they don't have like the imprint on them, is because, like I said, it came a little smushed, so I had to press them back into the pan. But there's something about this color story that I find very inspiring, and even though I feel like this is something we've seen from Lethal in the past, like, I feel like there's something, I don't know, just special about this, and it makes me want to use it. And I did 2 looks with this, I think, and I really, really enjoyed the looks that I did. I think they were beautiful, and the shimmers in here are so pretty. So pretty. Some of the prettiest shimmers that Lethal has ever done. So I felt like I had to rank this quite high because, like, just looking at it again, I'm like, I want to use this palette. Like, I don't know what I want to do with it, but I want to use it, and that says a lot. So it had to end up kind of high up. Next up is a palette that when I first got this in the mail, I didn't think that I would like this palette as much as I have ended up liking this palette. And this is not even like a new palette, but it's a new and reformulated palette. I think it's reformulated. I'm pretty sure it is. But this is from Bella Beauty Bar, and this is the Sun and the Sea palette. So this is a palette that they've had for quite a long time, but they decided to revamp it a little bit, and this is how it ended up looking. Now, I think if the matte selection in here was a little different, this probably would have ended up on top, honestly. Like, if these four mattes weren't so similar and these two blues weren't so similar, this definitely would have ended up higher, but I'm ranking it this high because the quality of this palette is so good. Like, even if I have the same sort of complaints with this palette as I did with some of the palettes that end up lower down, I just really enjoy the quality of this. I think the shimmers are outstanding. They're so beautiful. I love that there are two iridescent shades in here. I really like the tones of the neutrals as well. I do, again, wish that there was a darker neutral, maybe swapped out with one of these and just, you know, have the tones be a little bit different. But because the shimmers are so pretty and there is like enough of a variation in the matte colors to be able to do like different kind of looks, I don't know, like I want to use this palette again, and I feel like because I want to use this palette again, it needs to be ranked higher than some of the other palettes that maybe I don't want to use because I have some of the same issues, but I feel like this just inspires me a little bit more because there are more options in the shimmers to go with the matte. So I really like this palette. I think it's very, very pretty, and I'm happy I have it in my collection. For the top two, the second spot is actually going to go to the Delicious Delight, and this is from Cosmic Brushes. So here's what the palette looks like. I have not done a dedicated video with, I cannot speak today. I have not done a dedicated video with this one either, but I did bring this on one of my travels. I showed quite a few looks that I did with this palette, mostly together with other things. I pulled in other shimmers. I didn't really use this on its own. I have used some of the shimmers now, and I think that this palette is so pretty. Cosmic Brushes has amazing quality, especially for their price. They're not even like good for the price, they're just really, really good, but they're affordable on top of it. So if you've been looking for nice colorful palettes, a new indie brand to try, it's affordable, it's really well made. I don't know what to tell you. I think these are amazing palettes. All of the palettes that I have from Cosmic Brushes have been really, really good, and I'm very impressed with this. And I think the color story of this is just so fun. It's very summery, but it can also like lean into fall a little bit with like these mustards and these darker like jewel tones. There's also a really pretty multi-chrome in here, which I have yet to put on my eyes because I'm not really the biggest fan of black-based multi-chromes, but I think it's a beautiful palette, and I think if you have it or if you're looking to get it, I don't think you'd be disappointed. The palette in the number one spot, I feel like I'm not really surprised that this ended up higher, and I feel like this is something that happens a lot. It's that the palettes that I take the most time to do the most looks with usually tends to end up higher, and the reason for that is because the palettes that I end up doing a lot of looks with for videos are palettes that when I first get them into my collection, I'm really excited to use them and I'm already really inspired by them. And this is the palette that I think I did 4 looks with it, and it's the Glaminatrix Sugar and Spice palette. Now, I know this is quite a neutral palette, but I feel like there is something about this palette that just makes it a very special neutral palette. And I had so much fun with this. I really enjoyed the challenge of being able to like use these pastel shades together with the neutrals, and I got so many fun looks out of this. I really want to use this again. I think the shimmers are absolutely stunning, and I just think that they did a really good job with this color story. I'm still very inspired by this, and like I said, I want to use it again. And there's just something so like, I don't know, different about this palette that I don't feel like I've ever seen. I have never seen a neutral palette like combined with these colors before. I don't know what it is. Like, I just think it's really, really pretty. So yeah, that's why it had to end up where it did. Let me know if you were surprised by any of these. Maybe you were surprised by some of the palettes that ended up lower down. I feel like a lot of you know where I sort of stand with different things, and you can predict the outcome of these rankings even if you don't necessarily agree with them, because you know like how I think about these things by now. And I think that if you aren't new to my channel, you probably wouldn't be surprised by any of these. But if you are, let me know down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see some other ranking videos, I will put my ranking playlist up on the screen. And if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.